You're recording, Natalia, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it is a real privilege on behalf of a Rotary Peace Fellowship Alumni Association, Exult Solutions, Never Again Association, and Minorities for Peace to welcome you to this lecture and conversation with Ambassador Walter Gyger. It is wonderful to see such a diverse audience, and I see peace fellows, mediators, and human rights defenders from different parts of the world. So our session today will last 90 minutes and is being recorded. And if you prepare not to be on the recording, please keep your video off. And this lecture will last around 40 minutes, followed by a discussion and Q&A session moderated by our colleague Rukmini, and the chat will be open only during the discussion. And before giving the floor to our speaker, I would like to briefly frame why this conversation feels particularly important at this moment. And for many of us working in different fields in genocide education, memory work, minority rights, human rights protection, or peace building in conflict-affected areas, responsibility and moral commitment can be overwhelming, but our formal power often can be limited or even absent. And we work with ongoing violence or aftermath of violence, with histories that continue to shape identities, narratives, and public discourse. And in such context, power operates not only through governments, not only through decision makers, but it can also operate through building narratives, selective memory, or sometimes through silencing. And memory can also become a site of power struggle, and the past can be instrumentalized in the way to affect vulnerable communities such as minorities at present. And our conversation will not promise easy answers. Instead, it creates difficult questions. Where does meaningful agency still exist when power asymmetries are real? What does hope mean when fairness is not guaranteed? And where are the limits and where is the space to act responsibly within them? And these are not abstract questions for all of us, and we shape the choices we make in our work, often under constraint and without certainty. Walter Gyger brings 40 years of diplomatic experience across multilateral institutions and conflict-affected areas. And he is the author of a book, There We Hope, Building Lasting Peace, a Swiss Ambassador Insights, which is available online. And he invites us to consider a form of hope grounded in process, timing, responsibility, and relationships. And I believe that each of us today at this session may find something personally meaningful in his lecture today. Walter, thank you very much for being with us, and we look forward to your lecture. Before we begin, I would like also to invite my colleague Rukmini Iyer to offer a brief welcome and to share a few words on why this conversation feels especially timely today. And Rukmini, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, and welcome everyone. We still have people trickling in. Thank you for joining us. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation, which is titled Hope Without Illusions. We'll begin with a few brief housekeeping notes. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and this recording may be shared later on our respective organizational platforms and on social media channels. So if you prefer not to be visible in the video recording, please feel free to keep your video off. And your participation in the discussion, which will follow after Walter's presentation, is welcome either while your video is on or through the Zoom chat. Once Walter begins his presentation, the chat function will be closed so that we can all focus on the presentation. And the presentation is likely to last, as Natalia mentioned, for about 40 to 45 minutes, after which we open up the floor for reflections and questions. So as you listen to Walter, please note down your questions, and once we reopen the chat, you can share your questions and thoughts there, and we can move into a more thoughtful exchange at that point. If you experience any technical issues at any point in time, the chat with the hosts, Natalia and myself, will be open throughout the session, so you can ping us on the Zoom chat if you need any assistance, and we'll try our best. Also, a quick reminder that it is the holy month of Ramadan. Some of us present here may be fasting. So if you have your video on, please avoid having food and beverage while you're on video as a mark of respect. With that, welcome once again. And as Natalia mentioned, it's a very timely conversation given the time that we are living in geopolitically, ecologically, and otherwise. And we've all experienced in different ways conflicts deepening, institutions under strain. And for many of us who are in the peace building field, the question is not just about how to act, but how to act responsibly in a manner that we're not giving into illusions or delusions, we're not causing burnout for ourselves and others, and very importantly, we're not abandoning integrity in any manner. And while all of this is happening, while there's a lot of exhaustion we hear from the field, there's also a lot of stories of courage and commitment and clarity. And Walter's work speaks very directly into this tension and paradox that we are living in. And like mentioned before, it's not about easy answers. We're talking about disciplined reflection and understanding the limits of power without surrendering human agency. So, with that, I'm glad to be in this conversation with all of you. And Walter, over to you now.
Thank you, Rukmini, for this opening. Thank you, Natalia, for your invitation, your introduction, and thank you also for following with the slides. It is always a privilege to speak with Rotary Peace Fellows and other peace builders. You live at the intersection of ideals and constraints. You work with hope, but inside systems shaped by power, fear, and asymmetry. Let me be clear about what this talk is not. It is not a motivational speech. You already have commitment. It is not a geopolitical lecture. You know the headlines. This talk is about where your energy changes something and where it only exhausts you. Because without that clarity, even the best intentions become draining. Let me begin with a simple observation. Peace builders rarely lack motivation. What they often lack is a clear map of where their effort can still shape outcomes and where it cannot. After 40 years in diplomacy, I reached a demanding conclusion. Agency is real, but it is never unlimited. Pretending otherwise does not empower peace builders. It weakens them. What I want to offer you today is not optimism. It's orientation. A way to act without illusions, but also without surrender. We dare to hope when we learn to work in between ideals and constraints, between power and agency. Let's go to slide 2, please, where peace builders tend to overestimate their influence. This is one of the most difficult parts of this presentation. Not because it's controversial, but because it touches something very personal. Most frustration in peace building does not come from failure. It comes from misplaced effort. Over the years, I have seen deeply committed professionals burned out, not because they cared too little, but because they expected commitments to compensate for power. The purpose of this section is simple: to replace comforting illusions with clarity. Not to discourage you, but to protect you. Let me begin with a basic reality. Good intentions do not neutralize power. They never have. The first overestimation is believing goodwill compensates for asymmetry. Peacebuilders often assume that moral clarity creates leverage. It does not. Moral clarity gives orientation. It does not create pressure. Actors with power operate under different incentives than you. They can afford delay. They can afford ambiguity. They can afford silence. Those without power often cannot. I have seen negotiations where one side invested enormous moral energy and detailed proposals, while the other side simply waited, not out of malice, but because waiting was cost-free. When goodwill is mistaken for leverage, effort increases, but influence does not. That gap is where frustration begins. The second overestimation is assuming rules apply automatically. Rules matter. They shape expectations. They frame legitimacy. But rules are not self-executing. They are interpreted through interests and enforced politically. In my career, I have seen the same rule invoked urgently in one context and quietly ignored in another. Not because the rule changed, because the balance of interest did. When peace builders rely solely on legal arguments in a power-dominated environment, disappointment follows. Understanding this does not weaken commitments to norms. It makes that commitment sustainable. Now the third overestimation. It's equating visibility with impact. There is a strong belief that visibility equals influence. Yes, sometimes it does, often it does not. Public pressure can raise awareness, but it can also harden positions. Some of the most decisive influence I have witnessed never made the headlines. It worked through timing, through restraint, through quiet positioning. Influence is often invisible, precisely because it works. Not everything that matters is seen, and not everything that is seen matters. These three overestimations share a common root. They confuse moral force with political effect. When that confusion persists, peace building becomes emotionally costly. People work harder, speak louder, become more visible, and feel increasingly powerless. That is not a failure of character, it's a failure of orientation. If this were the whole story, peace building would indeed be hopeless. But it is not, because agency does exist, even when power is limited. It simply operates differently. And that is where I turn next. Please put on slide 3. Where peace builders underestimate their influence. If we only speak about overestimation, the conclusion would be discouraging. But I have observed over decades that it is different. Peace builders rarely control outcomes, but they shape conditions far more than they realize. The problem is not a lack of influence. It is misreading where influence actually operates. Not as a theory, but as a way of seeing influence in places where it is usually overlooked. In perception, in timing, and in restraint. I would like to offer you 4 advices. First, shaping the process rather than the outcome. Peace builders often feel powerless because they cannot decide outcomes. But outcomes are rarely decided directly. They are produced by processes. Who is in the room? Who is not? Which issues are addressed first? Which are postponed? This looks procedural. It's not. I once witnessed a negotiation that was completely stuck. Positions were repeated, nothing moved. What changed the atmosphere was not a better argument. It was a quiet reordering of the agenda. One highly sensitive issue was postponed. A less explosive issue was moved forward. No agreement was signed. No breakthrough announced. But the tone shifted. And once the tone shifted, new options became discussable. No outcome changed that day, but the process stopped producing dead ends. That is real influence. My second advice, influencing timing and sequencing. A proposal can fail not because it's wrong, but because it arrives at the wrong moment. Same content, same wording. I have seen this myself. What changed was not the idea at all. It was the context. You see, costs had accumulated. Positions had softened. Silence had become expensive. Peace builders rarely control the moment, but they can recognize when the moment changes. Timing shapes perception, and perception shapes possibility. Now, my third advice, acting as a connector when trust is low. Dialogue does not end, it changes form. Actors may stop speaking to each other, but they continue speaking about each other, not as advocates, not always as mediators, but as translators. I once found myself between two delegations who refused direct contact. No joint session, no shared statements, yet both sides kept asking me the same question. What do the others really want? The most useful intervention was not persuasion. It was reframing concerns in language the other side could hear without losing face. No agreement followed, but escalation was avoided. Sometimes influence is measured by what does not happen. And my fourth advice, protect dialogue when others want to walk away. The last form of underestimated influence is the quietest. When talks stall, walking away feels decisive. Staying feels passive. But continuity is rarely the real leverage. I remember a negotiation that produced nothing for months. Everyone was frustrated. Withdrawal seemed justified. Instead, the format was kept alive. Same room, same actors, no visible progress. Then, a crisis elsewhere changed the calculus, and suddenly there was a functioning channel ready to be used. Had it collapsed earlier, that opportunity would have been lost. Keeping dialogue alive is not weakness. It is strategic patience. Let me pull things together. Across all four areas, the pattern is consistent. Peacebuilders rarely win arguments. They preserve possibilities. They shape the conditions under which solutions may later emerge. They influence perception long before positions shift. They practice restraint when escalation would be easier. This is not minor influence. It's disciplined influence. And this is why the earlier section on overestimation was incomplete. Influence does exist, even when power is limited. It simply operates differently. Let me summarize over and underestimation of influence with one sentence. Influence is rarely about winning arguments. It's about keeping options open. That is not a secondary role. It's often the decisive one. Let's now move to slide 4. The governance process is a map and not a slogan. This may look simple, almost obvious, but it is constantly misunderstood. In my book, Dare We Hope, I call it the process tool. Not because it explains everything, but because it answers one decisive question. Where are we actually operating now? Governance is a sequence, not an event. Look at it like a map. It is only useful if you know where you are standing. Why does this matter? In governance and peace building, influence governs processes. Failures do not come from bad ideas. They come from working hard at the wrong stage. Arguing solutions when the problem is not shared. Negotiating when actors are not aligned. Celebrating agreements that collapse during implementation. Energy is invested, but at the wrong moment. This map helps prevent that. Let us look at the 5 stages of governance briefly and practically. The first stage is problem identification. What is the problem and who defines it? If actors define the problem differently, everything that follows becomes symbolic. You cannot negotiate solutions to a problem that is not jointly recognized. The second stage is vision. I'm not speaking about the ideal future. No, let's say yes. I'm not speaking about the ideal future, but about the imaginable one. Vision must stretch reality, but not disconnect from it. If vision is too abstract, decision-making will quietly take it ad absurdum. The next stage are actors' identification. Who matters? Who blocks? Who enables? Formal authority is rarely the full picture. If your actor map is wrong, your strategy will fail, no matter how sophisticated. The fourth stage is decision shaping and decision making. You must be aware that most decisions are not made where they are announced. They are shaped earlier in public debate, in informal alignments, in preparatory meetings, in drafts. I call this the governance cauldron in my book. If you try to influence outcomes at the final stage, you are too late. And the fifth stage, and I would say not one of the most important ones, is implementation. Implementation reveals whether the previous stages were done properly. This is where agreements go to fail, not because they were dishonest, but because incentives, capacities, or ownership were misread. Let me ask you something. Do not answer aloud, please. At which stage of this process are you operating right now? When I ask this question, many people realize something uncomfortable. They are investing energy, but not where the bottleneck actually is. Therefore, my core message, misdiagnosing the stage means misusing your energy. This is not a critique. It is an invitation to work more wisely. And this is where realism and agency begin to reconnect. Let's now move to slide 5. Power politics sets limits, but human agency remains. Yes, power sets limits. That is not a pessimistic statement. It's a descriptive one. If we ignore those limits, we misread the terrain. If we deny them, we exhaust ourselves. So let me structure this clearly around three grounding principles. Well, the first principle is that power sets limits. Not every outcome is reachable at every moment. This is one of the hardest lessons I have learned in diplomacy. An outcome can be morally justified, legally sound, but politically unrealizable. At the same time, well, pushing harder does not automatically make it reachable. Sometimes pushing closes space instead of opening it. Recognizing limits is not surrender. It's strategic clarity. Realism begins when we distinguish between what is desirable and what is politically reachable in the present configuration of power. The second principle, power does not determine everything. Even powerful actors need decisions to be accepted, anchored in procedure, and sustained over time. But if that outcome is not accepted, it remains unstable. If it is not grounded in recognizable procedures, it lacks durability. And if it is not given time to consolidate, it generates resistance. Even the strongest states and the most authoritarian leaders operate under these constraints. They must consider how decisions will be absorbed. They must manage costs. They must prevent erosion of support. Power alone does not secure stability. Acceptance, procedure, and time do. That is where space for agency reappears. And the third principle, within limits, agency shapes how power is exercised. Within the limits, agency does not disappear, it shifts. Yes, agency rarely overturns power structures overnight, but it shapes how power is exercised and how it evolves. It becomes decisive in transitions, in moments of restraint, in designing exits, very important, that allow movement without humiliation. Let me illustrate this very briefly. During my work between Russia and Georgia, the major political questions were frozen. A comprehensive solution was not reachable. That was a limit. So the question changed. Where can movement still occur? Could airlines reopen in specific circumstances, at Christmas or Easter, for instance? Could small-scale border traffic resume? Could administrative obstacles be eased? None of this altered the strategic balance, but it reduced isolation. It preserved minimal cooperation. It kept channels alive. That is agency shaping how power operates within constraints. Let me close this section There exists an equilibrium peace builders must hold. If you deny limits, you become ineffective. If you deny agency, you become cynical. Working with power is not endorsing it. It is refusing to be paralyzed by it. That is a discipline required in a world shaped by power politics. And it's a bridge to hope. Let's now turn to slide 6. Slide 6, please. Yes. What hope means in practice when fairness is not granted. Before we move towards a close, let me return to where we began, to hope. The title of my book is Dare We Hope. Not hope as optimism, not hope as a belief that the system is fair. In the world you operate in, fairness is not guaranteed. Power is uneven, access is uneven, consequences are uneven. If hope meant believing the system is fair, you would have very little reason to hope. So we must define it differently. Hope is not believing the system is fair. Hope is knowing where you can still move it. That is not an emotion. It is a professional stance. It begins with accepting limits without surrendering agency. You recognize asymmetry. You recognize constraints. You do not deny power, but you also refuse paralysis. Hope means choosing battles carefully. Not every fight deserves your energy. Strategic restraint is not weakness, it is judgment. Hope means investing in process even when outcomes are uncertain, because durable change rarely comes from dramatic gestures. It comes from prepared ground, it comes from sustained presence. And hope means staying in the room when progress is slow. Leaving is often easier. Staying requires discipline. Not staying blindly, not staying at any cost, but staying when the process itself still matters. This is disciplined hope. It does not deny reality. It works within it. Peace building is not about changing the world in one move. It's about knowing where a small move still matters, and then making that move quietly, persistently, professionally. The next slide, please. Takeaways. What can peace builders do differently after this talk? Let me make this very practical. I hope my presentation was useful. If yes, it should change something in how you work, not your values, not your commitment, but your calibration. First, stop investing energy where you have no leverage. Not every arena is influenceable. Discernment protects stamina. Second, identify precisely where you can shape process, timing, and relationships. If you cannot control outcomes, look at conditions. Can you adjust sequencing? Can you reframe perception? Can you keep a channel alive? That is not secondary work. That is strategic work. Third, diagnose where you are in the governance cycle before acting. Are you defining the problem? Are you aligning actors? Are you shaping decisions? Or are you already in implementation? Clarity about the stage prevents wasted efforts. Fourth takeaway, redefine success. Success is not forcing outcome. Success is keeping options open long enough for change to become possible. And the final takeaway, practice hope as disciplined realism. Accept limits. Protect agency. Choose carefully. Stay when it matters. I know none of these takeaways makes your work easier, but I hope they make it more sustainable. And that may be the most important form of influence you can exercise. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. I'm at you.
Thank you very much, Walter, for this grounded presentation. And I believe there are many questions in the room. You raised many points, and what I would take also for myself is this situational clarity, how to recognize limits, identify timing, choosing the right moment, and clear stage of a process is also important, and preserving space for what is possible. That means all options should be open, and the dialogue should be also available at all during the whole process. And I know at the same time it's very challenging because we are all following our moral commitments, and it can be also sometimes overwhelming. And I would like also to ask you the first questions before giving the floor to Rukmini and everyone. After 40 years in diplomacy, what belief you had in the beginning, and you had experience in many regions, in many countries, in different conflict areas, what you had early in your career, and what later you had to abandon?
Thank you, Natalia. Well, if I should answer after 40 years, am I more hopeful or more cautious? What has changed? I would say, Natalia, I'm less optimistic about the system, but I'm more confident in disciplined agency. There are always possibilities to act. It takes time to find them. Therefore, it is important to keep your hope, because if you do not hope, you abandon. There will be nothing. And yes, times are difficult, Natalia, but in a way, my hope today is bigger because the world has become more difficult. So we are more challenged. We must make bigger efforts.
Thank you, Walter. For me, it's also at the same time, for me, it's more optimistic at how we can preserve our agency and how we can continue to act. And I believe now that there are many questions in the room, and maybe Rukmini, you can start the Q&A session if possible.
Yes, thank you, Natalia. And thank you for all of those insights, Walter. Several of you began after Walter had begun his presentation, so a formal welcome into this conversation. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. And you would have noticed that the chat is now open and a couple of you have already posted questions there. Thank you. We'll shortly start taking them up. Walter has a hard stop in about 43 minutes from now, so we will attempt to take as many questions as we can till then. So for the sake of efficiency, it'll be lovely if you can put up your question on the chat, if that's okay. If you absolutely need to ask it vocally, then please use the raise hand function and we will call upon you. So, Walter, we have the first question from Sakina, who asks, what are the root steps for a peace builder while considering realities? Where does the path of peace on earth come in your life?
Thank you. To answer this question, I have a very simple answer. You must respect the other. To find your path, you must respect the others. What I have seen often in negotiations, people only saw their own position. People were convinced they were right. And what I found the most difficult one to learn in my diplomatic career is to change my skin and to enter into the skin of the other. If you respect the other, this doesn't mean, and this is very important, that you accept his position. But you can understand him. And when the other understands you, then you have a basis on which peace builders can work. Did I answer the question?
That's a start, Walter. Thank you. Yeah. And there's so many other layers to explore there as well. We have a couple of questions from Monica, who is from Bangladesh. I'm going to pick up one of those to start with. She asks, when fairness is not guaranteed and power politics dominate, how can peace builders sustain disciplined realism without losing moral clarity or long-term vision?
Thank you. Well, this question I was expecting. For me, I would reformulate these questions in the sense, where does justice fit in my framework? Justice is definitely within my framework. It is the reason for you, for your work, for what you are doing. But justice does not operate in a vacuum. And this is difficult to realize. Justice operates inside power structures. When justice and political reachability diverge, the task is not to abandon justice or to abandon your moral principles. But you have to see how you can sequence it, sequence the process. Let's be more concrete. Durable justice is often built in stages, each constrained by power configurations over its time. Yes, I agree, there are moments when justice demands accountability and when power blocks it. At that moment, you face three options. One is insist and fail. The second is compromise and dilute. And the next one is sequencing justice, and I think I must explain this term. It means distinguish between what must happen immediately to stop or at least mitigate harm, and what must happen later to secure accountability. Sequencing justice is not postponing justice indefinitely. It is structuring when and how different elements of justice become politically and socially viable, and to find the right moment to do something. If we demand everything at once, we may achieve nothing. If we agree justice delayed, I agree, justice delayed is very dangerous. But justice demanded in ways that collapse peace can be equally destructive. So the task is not to choose between peace and justice, but to structure the timing of assuming your responsibility. Did I answer the question?
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, that is insightful. We have Sevinch, who's originally from Turkey. I'm not quite sure where she's located now. She tends to be out and about. Sevinch, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute.
One, hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Walter. Thank you so much for the nice presentation. My question could be just a brainstorm. In my country, everything become very difficult, especially for the human rights and peace building and justice. So lots of NGOs has been closed and lots of human rights activities has been in prison. And then the public, they are very scared the current injustice in the country. So under this condition, what is the best way to wait until the government leave, or what will be the best strategy? Because we see that there are many places in injustice and then human activities in the prison. So we cannot even speak for peace. What could be a strategy? I know it's very difficult, but you may have 40 years experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sevinch. And I do not know whether you know, but Turkey is very close to my heart. I think you have all the time to ask yourself, what is politically reachable? Reachability is not intuition, it's analysis. So you do not feel it, but you really have to analyze the situation. It depends on incentives, costs, what price would you have to pay, constraints, alignment, very important, timing. You see, Sevinch, reachability is dynamic. You have to analyze and you'll see if it changes as costs shift. My whole speak was about misreading reachability. Overestimation of your possibility leads to burnout. Underestimation leads to paralysis. So you have to find, as I mentioned in my presentation, the middle way. And for this, you have to analyze very carefully. Or to say something I have been taught in my diplomatic career, you have always to reflect on how far can you go too far. If you go too far, it will be counterproductive. But if you just stay within the limits, nothing will move either. This is what I can advise you, but you see, Sevinch, we would have to consider concrete cases in its environment. What I tell to you, I'm very much aware of it, is very general. But then you have to translate this into your reality and find the middle way. Where do you still have agency? What is possible? What is not? There are always things you can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for that question, Sevinch. Joanna from Uganda has a lot of resonance with that question as well. Also want to acknowledge Karen from Germany and France. Walter, Karen says that she agrees with practicing disciplined realism and enhancing processes of awareness building, which she also does as a psychotherapist. We have our friend Ilahi from Iran, and her question is, how would you define leverage in your suggestions? And maybe you could give some examples in the context of authoritarian states. What does leverage mean there?
Leverage means to have an influence. This means that your efforts has consequences. But I haven't understood the whole question. Could you please just repeat the question?
Ilahi, are you able to speak up? If you could unmute and talk, that would be lovely.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so just to briefly, you said that you have to know where you have leverage so you don't overestimate your influence, where you can make a change, right? You have to know your limits. So your limits are where your leverage is, like your leverages work within your limits. What are your influences in terms of working with people or the government on both sides when you don't have like direct power within the government? Did it make it any more clear?
No, it's, I understand you perfectly. The first point is work on relationships with the people whose act you want to influence. You see, since you are from Iran, my first posting was in Iran. And then I remember well, I was sent to an Iranian ministry to negotiate something. And the first question I was asked, are you married? The man on the other side of the table wanted to know me, who I am. And you see, it's very important to establish this personal relationship. And you have to invest in personal relationships, not always having in mind what you want to achieve. relations which you do not have. You cannot choose. You cannot just knock at the door at the moment you need to speak to somebody. You have to try to know these people earlier. And this is something very difficult to learn. When you know a person, then you start understanding his limits. Once you understand his limits, then you can work on his perception. You say, yes, I understand this you cannot do, but perhaps you can do this and that. But to work on the perception of a person or an institution, mainly a person, you need to know this person. So you see, you cannot ignore constraint. If you ignore constraints, you lose influence. And once you understand constraints, once you understand the other one, then you can stretch, then you can open possibilities for actions. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank
you, Lahi. We have Monica from Bangladesh who has, I guess, a follow-up to her previous question. Monica, go for it.
Thank you so much. I really, it's my pleasure to be here and listening you. It's very insightful. I just thinking after receiving my first question answer is just like another question that is really aligned with my first question. And thank you for a response to my question. That is really clear to me. I just would like to know about in the moment when compassion is necessary as a pace builder to keep dialogue with the power holder. How can pace builder distinguish between strategic passions and the risks of legitimize injustice?
Thank you, Monica. Can I turn the question a little bit otherwise, perhaps more directly? How to avoid becoming complicit? This is the question I think many of you are asking yourself. Well, I have to admit that my emphasis on continuity and strategic patience can be interpreted as legitimizing harmful regimes. It's not. But I'm very much aware that many of you may have a deep ethical challenge. However, I would like to make clear three things. Engagement does not mean endorsement. Second, dialogue does not mean approval. And contact does not mean legitimacy. I gave you this example, staying in the room or at your place. It's only justified, and there I would be clear, if it preserves options that reduce harm or prevent escalation. If dialogue merely stabilizes repression without reducing harm, then withdrawal may be justified. I say this very clearly. The ethical test is not moral purity. It's whether your presence reduces suffering or increases it. Thank you.
A lot to chew on, Walter. Thank you for that. We have a question from Masale. Looking back, is there a practical diplomatic decision or a moment that changed your understanding of how peace is actually built in multilateral settings? For context, Masale is from Ethiopia and is a peace fellow in Japan. I see you.
Thank you very much. Well, to be frank, yes, I've written my book, but I've not learned what is written in my book by reading books. What I have learned was, when I have learned the insights I have shared with you, this was by doing my work, by speaking with people, by listening to others. And this is advice I would like to give you. Be very open. Go to the others. Try under all circumstances to understand the other. Do not make the mistake. Understanding is not accepting. But you see, to create a common ground where you have influence, where you can be a change maker, you have to understand the other. You have to understand his limits, his constraints under which he is working. So the solution you cannot find, oh sorry, I should promote my book, but not the contrary, but you cannot find in a book. A book may help you how you move in the terrain, how you approach others. A book may open your senses, may open your thinking, may open new horizons. But then you have to put all this in the context of your reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. And Misale, we will post the link to the book. He's asked for the link to the book. We'll post that shortly on the chat. Christine, Rotarian from Germany, has a question. Can Rotary be a partner in peace in general, and for you, Walter, in your work specifically?
Rotary can play a very important role indeed. If Rotary understands that it is a grassroots organization. You see, I think the time is over when in 1945, Rotarians participated at the San Francisco conference and influenced the drafting of the UN Charter. These times are over, but Rotary is a worldwide organization with an understanding of various cultures and an organization whose members have access to the people in their countries. So yes, Rotary could play a very, very important role. One other condition is that Rotarians around the world work together. And let me add something else. Peace building and the work you do as a peace fellow, you cannot do it from one day to the other. Not from 1 year to the other. Now, Rotary, very often, you know, the club presidents change every year. If every incoming president has his own objectives, the impact will be limited to a year. But peace work takes a lot of time. So Rotary should bring into its work more continuity. But don't underestimate the possibilities of Rotary. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And just to clarify, Christine has also said she's asking this also as a member of the board of Rotary International, where they have longer terms. We can take
and where they have a lot of influence on how Rotary and the Rotary Foundation is functioning.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, Christine, for your engagement. We can take a few more questions. We have about 15 minutes left. Walter, I was very struck by the distinction you made between power and agency, and how often loss of power can be construed as loss of agency. And I was wondering, are there ways in which you've managed to articulate agency? Because you can't leverage it unless you've named it, right? So what are some ways in which you've managed to do that?
Well, I mentioned the example of my work between Russia and Georgia. This was after between 2009 and 2011. So after the war between Russia and Georgia. And Switzerland was representing Georgia in Russia. This was my task. And my Swiss colleague, ambassador in Tiflis, was representing Russia in Georgia. And, well, we were in your situation, you know. We did not just want to transmit official messages, and but we wanted to promote peace, to do something for the people. And this is exactly when we were thinking what could be done. And you see, one of our proposals, which was accepted, airlinks were interrupted, so no direct flights anymore. But we could facilitate negotiations that allowed at Easter, at Christmas, to have a direct flight. You see, this is my agency was to find within the constraints and the limits possibility for action. Agency means that I'm not just a causal agent. Not everything is caused by causality, but I have an impact on what is happening. And you see, when even in your daily life, you may have from time to time the impression you are just acting under causality, but you always have agency. Agency allows you to cut a chain and to change a direction. It allows you to do a little step. And let me just make one point very clear. You must distinguish between moral clarity. Moral clarity tells you where you want to go. But there is another term. I call it strategic realism. This tells you how far you can move today. So agency is applying your strategic realism. Thank you.
And that's a very useful distinction between moral clarity and strategic realization. Thank you. Karen has a question. Karen's from Germany and France. And the question is there a way that we can learn beforehand how to practice what you describe in your book, instead of learning everything only by making mistakes in our engagements and approaches and experiencing setbacks and energy loss?
Well, concerning my book mainly deals with the big geostrategic issues. But to speak about it, you see, I find it very important that somebody like me, who was 40 years in the diplomatic service, shares what life was his diplomatic careers has learned him. And one of my deep conviction is that if we would apply our knowledge, wars could have been avoided. There is a lot of knowledge available. You see, to answer the question, yes, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot from history, for instance. You see, history does not repeat itself. But human beings are repeating the same mistakes time and again. So we can learn from what has happened. And for this we have, of course, to study and learn. And then when we are in a specific situation, we can ask ourselves, well, how was this handled? And it's very interesting. From time to time, you can go back to the Greeks, to the Romans, and find how certain things were managed at that very moment. Yes, there is a lot to learn, but it's very important. We have the past, we have the knowledge of the past. We have the present and we have the future. And we have to build bridges. And this is the challenge. And you see, this is what I wanted to do with my book, make a bridge between generations. But what can we learn from the past for the present? Of course, our situation is different. I give you a concrete example since we have still some minutes. You see, if you go back in history, if you go back to the French Revolution, the people at that time, they had a vision. They knew what future they wanted to realize in making a revolution in the present. Now, my point is that today, everything is changing, everything. You, the young generation, you will live in a completely different world than I was living in. But what I'm missing is a vision. And when you remember, I was speaking about the process tool, and the second stage was vision. If you do not know where you want to go, you will just turn around. So, answer concretely, yes, we can learn from the past. A lot of knowledge is available, but when we are in the situation, we have to remember it and not just act as a firefighter, but understand the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And we have acknowledgement and gratitude coming your way, Walter, from Matthew and Veliswa in the chat. And at this point, I want to bring in Natalia. Natalia has a question, and then she'll also close us out.
Yes, I wanted also to clarify more the moment as someone working with difficult histories, for example, at museums, and we know when there is, for example, change in the power, and they try to reinterpret narratives, and also have a lot of pressure at the museums and how we deliver a message to the audience. So I would like to ask you how we should identify the moment when we should be to have a visible public action or to stay calm and wait when we can react. So how we can identify this moment, and I believe it also useful in other context, not only in our work.
Thank you, Natalia. Well, you see, you ask a general question which can only be answered in a case by case. You are absolutely right. Saying the right thing at the wrong moment has no effect. So, how to find the right moment to speak? For this, I would say a lot of understanding of the perception is necessary. For me, key is always understanding a situation and see when a situation is blocked. You see, when somebody made a statement, then immediately to contradict, maybe completely, maybe it's the wrong thing. To say it afterwards, maybe the right moment, but afterwards may also be too late. Let's come back to the governance process, the understanding of this process. I distinguish clearly between decision shaping and decision making. Usually, on big issues, you are not involved in the decision-making process. There you can do lobby work, there your relations are important. But decision shaping is very often open. Therefore, this term of cauldron of governance. Everybody is putting its ingredients inside. Now you see, when a process is still in the decision shaping phase, you can introduce an idea and it can be taken up. If you do it afterwards, it's too late. So, Natalia, to answer your question, you have to understand the moment. You have to understand the situation. And for this, yes, you need to understand the others.
Thank you, Walter. Natalia, would you like to close us out? We have the last few minutes.
If someone else would like to add something, those who didn't say anything, we still have a couple of minutes.
Dirk, how are you, my dear friend from Ukraine?
Still alive. I kept silence because I don't want to have such a global discussion focused in my region. I will have my first going out to Geneva in beginning of March. So I think if we have time, we will meet for a glass of wine in Auberge du Soleil, and we will get to the implementation, to the real case study, and I will be extremely thankful to get your insights, because globally what you say, I of course understand. Concretely, practically now, I don't see the road. I by the way, I can show you. I of course bought your book because I understand the poor salary of a poor diplomat in Switzerland. Therefore, to support you, I took your book. I start to read it. What is difficult having electricity 2 hours per day? But anyway, this was very insightful. I warmly thank you. I'm happy to see so many good friends like Rukmini, like Natalia, Dzień dobry, Caroline, Christine. Christine is here. Wonderful. So Rotary is present in strengths. Sirs, I remember you also, good old friends all together. Peace is possible. Walter, see you in March. This was really amazing. Thank you very much.
You see, with just to 1 minute more, to give a concrete example together with Dirk. This was before the war broke out. We were working on, Dirk was working with Rotarians between Ukraine and Russia. And without going into too many details, the importance of that work at that very moment was not yet understood by everybody. It changed after the war broke out. Now you see how important it is to work before it breaks out. This is your work as Peacebuilders. Thank you very much for having invited me, having been listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter, and everyone. And Rukmini and I will be sharing with you the recording and the presentation and more information. Also, if you'd like to connect with Walter, you can do it from LinkedIn, and we will share this information later. And yes, and we will continue our meetings. And next month, Rukmini and I will invite a speaker to discuss the topic further, and we will focus on peace negotiations. And of course, Walter, you are welcome to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have to leave now. My guest
Thank
is here.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, Walter.
Thank you.